They shut me out. Barred me from the ceremony like I was a stranger, not blood. My own family, standing tall under the Montana sun, draped in medals and pride, refused me a seat. A young guard at the gate, barely old enough to shave, clutched his clipboard and spat their verdict: "You're not on the list. They said you don't belong." My legacy, decades of service, sweat, and sacrifice, erased because of one choice they never understood. The crowd cheered for their heroes, their voices a wall of joy I couldn't breach. Rage burned in my chest, but I stood firm, eyes locked on the flags waving without me. They thought they could bury my truth. They were wrong. I'm Abigail Thompson. I'm 56 years old. And today, the ground shook with the roar of engines, bringing justice they couldn't silence. The cheers faded, but the sting of exclusion lingered like smoke. I stood 50 feet from Willow Creek Central Park, the heart of Montana's pride, where my family's legacy was being polished under a cloudless sky. The Thompson name was a beacon here, 3 generations of warriors etched into this town's soul. My father, Richard Thompson, a Marine colonel, sat front row, his silver hair catching the sun. My brother, Michael, a major in the Air Force, adjusted his crisp uniform, basking in applause. My niece, Emily, a naval cadet, clutched her speech notes, her eyes bright with purpose. They were the face of honor at this annual ceremony, flags snapping in the breeze, banners proclaiming Thompson valor. I was once part of that banner. For 30 years, I, Abigail Thompson, led Air Force Special Ops, navigating missions so classified they had no name. Yemen, 2008, changed everything. One choice, to save 50 kids, branded me a traitor. My family didn't ask why. They erased me. "You shamed us," Richard growled at a dinner years ago, his fork still. Now, their laughter echoed across the park, a wall I couldn't climb. Yet, as I gripped the cold iron fence, my resolve hardened. They could ban me, but they couldn't bury my truth. The park buzzed with pride, but for me, Abigail Thompson, it was a graveyard of memories. I stood behind the iron fence, 50 feet from the stage where my family basked in Willow Creek's adoration. The Thompson legacy, 3 generations of military heroes, was being celebrated with speeches and salutes, yet my name was a ghost, scrubbed from their story. My father, Richard Thompson, sat ramrod straight, his colonel's medals glinting like accusations. My brother, Michael Thompson, leaned into the crowd's applause, his major's stripes a badge of untarnished honor. My niece, Emily Thompson, paced near the podium, her naval cadet uniform crisp, her ambition a mirror of the family's unyielding code. I was once their equal, a special ops commander who led Air Force missions through shadows no one dared name. But Yemen, 2008, rewrote my fate. One choice, to save 50 children, cost me everything. My family didn't seek the truth. They built a wall of silence, and I was on the wrong side. 17 years ago, I stood in our family's dining room, 200 miles from here, in Missoula. The oak table was set for 12, with name cards in gold script. Richard's read, Colonel. Michael's, Captain. Mine? Just Abigail. No rank, no pride. I sat at the far end, next to a coat rack, my presence a formality. Richard carved the roast, his eyes never meeting mine. Michael boasted about a promotion, his voice loud, confident. "The Thompsons carry the torch," he said, raising a glass. Everyone clinked, except me. My glass stayed untouched. Emily, then 5, tugged my sleeve, whispering, "Why don't you have a title, Aunt Abby?" I forced a smile. "Some titles aren't written down, kiddo." Richard overheard. "Some titles are lost," he snapped, his voice like gravel. The room fell silent. I swallowed the ache, cleared my plate, and left without a goodbye. That night, I learned my photo, taken the day I earned my commander's wings, was gone from the hallway. In its place hung a framed flag, folded tight, like a verdict. The erasure didn't stop there. Family gatherings dwindled. Invitations stopped coming. When Michael's son was born, I found out through a coworker's Facebook post, not a call. At Richard's 75th birthday, held at a VFW hall 10 miles away, I drove up, hoping for a seat. The organizer, a retired sergeant, blocked the door. "Sorry, Abby. Richard's orders. No admittance." I nodded, parked across the street, and watched shadows dance through the windows, laughter spilling out like salt in a wound. My name was stripped from the Thompson military plaque, a brass slab in Richard's study. Michael had it redone, engraved with "Future Heroes," where my rank once stood. I didn't fight it. I couldn't. Yemen's truth was locked behind a classified seal, and I'd sworn to protect the kids I saved, even if it meant carrying their blame. In Yemen, 2008, I led a covert op in a war-torn village, 6,000 miles from Montana. Intel marked a compound as a weapons cache. Instead, we found 50 children, caged, starving, used as shields by insurgents. Command ordered us to hold position, diplomatic ties hung in the balance. I saw their faces, eyes hollow, hands trembling. I broke protocol, split my team, and got them out under gunfire. No one died, but the mission exposed a political deal. My report was buried. My career ended. I signed a non-disclosure agreement, not for me, but for those kids, whose lives would have been headlines if I fought back. Richard called it desertion. "You broke the chain of command," he said over the phone, his voice cold. "You're no Thompson." I hung up, my hands shaking, and let the silence grow. Now, in Willow Creek's park, the crowd roared for Michael's speech. Emily adjusted her cap, ready to speak next. Richard clapped, his pride ablaze. I gripped the fence, my knuckles white. They thought they'd erased me. But truth doesn't vanish. It waits. And as the wind carried their cheers, I felt it, a tremor, deep and steady, not yet audible, but coming. My truth was on its way. The Willow Creek Park pulsed with fervor, the crowd's cheers a relentless tide. I, Abigail Thompson, stood rooted behind the iron fence, 50 feet from the stage where my family's legacy gleamed like polished brass. The Thompson ceremony was in full swing, a parade of valor under Montana's wide sky. My father, Richard Thompson, sat front row, his colonel's posture unyielding, eyes fixed on the podium. My brother, Michael Thompson, had just stepped down, his major's uniform drawing applause that echoed like a drum in my chest. Now, my niece, Emily Thompson, took the stage, her naval cadet cap tilted with purpose, her voice clear and sharp. At 22, she was the family's rising star, a beacon of their unblemished pride. I gripped the fence, my knuckles pale, bracing for her words. I'd taught her to aim a rifle at 10, braided her hair at 12. She was my shadow then. Today, she was my judge. Emily's speech began with praise for the Thompson service, her words soaring over the crowd. "Our family stands for duty," she declared, her gaze sweeping the park. "From my grandfather's battles to my father's missions, we've carried the flag without faltering." The crowd nodded, hands over hearts. Then her tone shifted, colder, deliberate. "But not all who wear the uniform honor it," she said, pausing for effect. "Some choose self over service, abandoning their post, their team, their name." My breath caught. She meant me. The crowd murmured, heads turning, searching. Emily's eyes didn't find me, but her words did, each one a blade. In Yemen, 2008, one Thompson turned her back on command, risking lives for her own agenda. That's not courage. That's betrayal. Gasps rippled through the park. Richard's jaw tightened, his approval silent but clear. Michael stared at the ground, his silence louder than agreement. My heart pounded, a storm trapped in my ribs. 17 years ago, in Yemen, I'd saved 50 children, defying orders to protect them from a political game. I'd paid with my career, my name, my family. Emily didn't know the truth, none of them did. They'd swallowed the story Richard fed them, the one that painted me as a deserter. I remembered her at 5, her tiny hand in mine, asking, "Aunt Abby, why don't you have a title?" Now, she stood 100 feet away, rewriting my life for 500 strangers. We don't celebrate failure, Emily continued, her voice rising. The Thompsons stand for honor, not shame. The crowd clapped, some hesitantly, others with zeal. A child near the fence pointed at me, whispering to his mother, "Is that her?" The mother shushed him, pulling him away. I didn't flinch. My feet stayed planted, my eyes locked on Emily's silhouette against the stage's red, white, and blue bunting. A single tear traced my cheek, hot and fleeting. I wiped it away, my hands steady. I wanted to shout, to tell her about the children, the cages, the gunfire I'd faced to bring them out. But my lips stayed sealed. I'd sworn to protect those kids, even from the spotlight of my defense. The pain was a vice, squeezing tighter with every word Emily spoke. She'd been my pride, my hope for the future. Now, her voice was a whip, lashing me in public, in the town that once called me hero. Richard clapped first, his hands slow, deliberate. Michael joined, his eyes still downcast. The crowd followed, their applause a wave that drowned my silence. Emily stepped back, her chest high, unaware of the weight she'd just added to my scars. I could have walked away, disappeared into Willow Creek's quiet streets, 10 miles from this park. But I stayed. Not for them, not for redemption, but for the truth I carried, the truth they couldn't erase. As Emily's voice faded, a low rumble stirred the air, faint but growing, like a storm on the horizon. My pulse slowed. Something was coming. The air in Willow Creek Central Park hung heavy, thick with the sting of Emily's words. I, Abigail Thompson, stood behind the iron fence, 50 feet from the stage, my niece's accusation, betrayal, not courage, still searing my ears. The crowd's applause for her speech faded into a restless hum, their eyes darting, some landing on me like stones. My father, Richard Thompson, sat rigid in the front row, his colonel's medals a silent endorsement of my disgrace. My brother, Michael Thompson, adjusted his major's cap, avoiding my gaze, his silence a betrayal of its own. Emily, her naval cadet uniform sharp, stepped back from the podium, her chin high, oblivious to the wound she'd carved. My hands gripped the fence, steady despite the ache in my chest. 17 years of silence, of carrying Yemen's truth alone, had led to this moment. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Then, the ground trembled. It started as a low growl, like thunder rolling from the horizon, 10 miles out. The crowd stirred, heads turning toward Main Street. Children clutched their parents' hands. A woman shaded her eyes, squinting. "What's that?" she whispered. The rumble grew, a deep, mechanical roar that shook the folding chairs. Dust curled into the sky, a haze lit gold by the Montana sun. Then they appeared, 30 Black Hawk SUVs and armored trucks, American flags snapping on their hoods, rolling in tight formation like a steel tide. The convoy stretched half a mile, a wall of power that drowned the park's chatter. 300 soldiers stepped out, boots hitting the grass in unison, forming ranks with machine-like precision. No music, no sirens, just the weight of their presence. The ceremony froze. Emily's hands fell to her sides. Michael's jaw dropped. Richard stood, slow and uncertain, his eyes narrowing. A final vehicle, a sleek black SUV, pulled up at the center. The door swung open, and out stepped General Samuel Brooks, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders, his Air Force dress blues immaculate after 40 years of service. The crowd parted like water, their whispers swallowed by silence. Samuel didn't glance at the stage, didn't acknowledge Richard's stiff salute or Michael's stunned stare. He walked straight to the fence, his boots clipping the grass, stopping 3 feet from me. His eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. Then, with a snap that cut the air, he raised his hand in a salute. "Welcome back, General Abigail Thompson," he declared, his voice a cannon, clear and unyielding. Gasps erupted. A program slipped from someone's hand, fluttering to the ground. My name, General Abigail Thompson, rang across the park, a truth unshackled after 17 years. The soldiers behind Samuel moved as one, 300 hands rising in a synchronized salute, a corridor of honor that stretched 200 feet across the green. The crowd was a statue gallery, breaths held, cameras forgotten. Richard's face paled, his hands clenching the chair's edge. Michael's lips parted, no sound escaping. Emily's eyes widened, her certainty crumbling. I didn't return the salute. Not yet. I stepped forward, through a gate someone had quietly unlatched, my spine straight, my heart steady. General Brooks, I said, my voice low but firm, I didn't expect this. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. You earned it, Abby. 17 years overdue. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising. This woman led missions in shadows, saved lives in places we can't name. Yemen, 2008, wasn't a failure. It was a triumph. The park was silent, save for the flag's faint flutter. I felt the weight of 17 years shift, not gone, but lighter. Not because they believed me now, but because the truth had a voice, and it wasn't mine alone. Samuel stepped aside, his soldiers still saluting. A murmur broke through the crowd, General Thompson? Like a wave gathering strength. I stood taller, not for pride, but for the 50 children whose lives were my legacy. The rumble of engines had stopped, but another sound was rising, one I'd waited years to hear. The Willow Creek Park stood still, the echo of General Samuel Brooks' salute lingering like a held breath. I, Abigail Thompson, stood 20 feet from the stage, the weight of 300 soldiers' salutes anchoring me to the Montana earth. My name, General Abigail Thompson, had just shattered 17 years of silence, declared by a 4-star general before a stunned crowd. My father, Richard Thompson, gripped his chair, his colonel's face drained of color. My brother, Michael Thompson, stared at the ground, his major's cap tilted, his pride unmoored. My niece, Emily Thompson, clutched the podium's edge, her naval cadet's confidence shaken, her eyes searching for me through the haze of truth. The iron fence behind me, once a barrier, now felt like a threshold I'd crossed. The crowd's murmurs grew, a tide of questions, General Thompson? But before they could crest, a new figure stepped forward, and the air shifted again. She was young, maybe 30, her dark hair pulled back, her gray suit modest but sharp. She carried a folded letter, her steps measured, her face marked by a faint scar above her left eyebrow. I knew her, not by name, but by that scar, a memory from Yemen, 2008, when I'd carried her, a trembling 6-year-old, from a cage under gunfire. General Brooks nodded to her, and she took the podium, her presence quiet but commanding. The microphone crackled as she began. My name is Dr. Noor Hassan, she said, her voice steady, cutting through the park's 500 souls. I was born in a village near Sana'a, Yemen. In 2008, I was one of 50 children held as human shields by insurgents. We were caged, starved, forgotten, until one woman refused to let us die. The crowd was silent, their eyes locked on Noor. Richard's hands trembled, his knuckles white. Michael lifted his gaze, his breath shallow. Emily's lips parted, her hands falling limp. Noor's words flowed, each one a thread pulling tight the truth I'd buried. General Abigail Thompson led her team into that compound, against orders, she said. She didn't wait for clearance. She didn't bow to politics. She saw us, 50 terrified kids, and chose us over her career. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. I remember her voice, calm, saying, "You're safe now." I remember her jacket around my shoulders, her arms carrying me through smoke and bullets. She saved us all, and paid with her name. Noor reached into her pocket, unfolding the letter. This is from my brother, Jamal, another child she saved, she said, her eyes glistening. He wrote this before he died of cancer last year, at 22. He wanted her to know. She read, her voice soft but piercing, to the woman who gave me a chance, thank you for seeing us when the world didn't. I became a teacher because of you. I hope you're proud. A sob broke from the crowd, near the back. A woman wiped her face. A man bowed his head. My throat tightened, but I stood firm, my eyes on Noor. Her words were my absolution, not from guilt, but from silence. She looked at me, 100 feet away, and spoke directly. "General Thompson, I'm a human rights advocate now, because you gave me a life to live. We, the 50 you saved, we never forgot you." She turned to the crowd. History tried to erase her, but we didn't. Her courage lives in every child who grew up, in every dream we dared to chase. The park was a sea of held breaths. Richard's eyes met mine, fleeting, raw, his pride cracking. Michael's shoulders slumped, his cap in his hands. Emily's face crumpled, tears streaking her cheeks, her judgment undone. Noor stepped down, the letter clutched to her chest. She walked toward me, stopping 5 feet away. "Thank you, General Thompson," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. I nodded, my voice locked in my chest. The crowd didn't clap, not yet. The moment was too heavy, too sacred. I felt 17 years of pain shift, not vanish, but lighten, carried now by a voice that wasn't mine. The truth had spoken, and it was louder than any applause. The Willow Creek Park held its breath, Dr. Noor Hassan's words, her gratitude, her brother's letter, still trembling in the air. I, Abigail Thompson, stood 20 feet from the stage, the weight of her testimony settling into my bones like rain on parched Montana soil. The crowd, 500 strong, was silent, their faces a mosaic of awe and shame. My father, Richard Thompson, sat in the front row, his colonel's hands clasped so tightly his knuckles gleamed white, his eyes locked on the ground, no longer able to meet mine. My brother, Michael Thompson, clutched his major's cap, his shoulders hunched, the pride he'd worn like armor now cracked. My niece, Emily Thompson, leaned against the podium, her naval cadet's face streaked with tears, her judgment undone by truth. General Samuel Brooks stood nearby, his 4-star presence a quiet sentinel. For 17 years, I'd carried Yemen's truth alone. Now, it was free, and so was I. I didn't need their applause. I didn't crave their medals or their stage. What I needed was for the truth to breathe, to stand in the light after years in shadow. As Noor stepped back, the crowd began to stir, soft whispers growing into a hum. A woman in the 3rd row stood, clapping slowly, then another joined, and another, until the park swelled with applause, not for glory, but for something deeper, something real. I nodded, not to them, but to the 50 children whose lives were my legacy, whose futures were my vindication. Richard rose, his movements heavy, like a man carrying decades of mistakes. He didn't speak, didn't approach, but his eyes found mine for the first time in years. They weren't soft, but they were open, raw with a question he'd never dared ask: what really happened? I held his gaze, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of someone who'd survived erasure. Days later, I returned to my farm, 15 miles outside Willow Creek, where the field stretched wide and the air smelled of sage and earth. My boots sank into the familiar dirt, the same dirt I'd walked after Yemen, after the silence, after the family I'd lost. I didn't unpack my old Air Force jacket, still folded in a trunk with my commander's wings. I didn't need to. The truth didn't live in medals or uniforms, it lived in the lives I'd saved, in Noor's voice, in the letter from a boy who'd become a teacher. I set 2 chairs on my porch, one for me, one for someone I wasn't sure would come. The second mug sat empty, steam curling from my coffee in the morning chill. I wasn't waiting for redemption. I was making space for peace. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, a familiar gray truck pulled up the gravel drive, 200 feet from my porch. Richard stepped out, his colonel's posture softened by age, his eyes carrying a weight I hadn't seen before. He didn't knock, didn't speak at first. He just walked to the porch, his boots slow, deliberate, like every step was a reckoning. I gestured to the empty chair. He sat, his hands resting on his knees, the silence between us heavy but not hostile. "I didn't come to apologize," he said, his voice low, rough, like sandpaper. "I came to listen." I poured coffee into the second mug, sliding it toward him. "Then listen," I said, my voice steady, not accusing, but firm. We sat there, two Thompsons, not as colonel and outcast, but as father and daughter, watching the horizon shift. No words could undo 17 years. No apology could rebuild the family I'd lost. But that moment, Richard's presence, his willingness to sit, to hear, was enough. I didn't need him to say I was right. I needed him to see I was still here, unbroken, unashamed. The truth had done its work, not by shouting, but by standing firm. I looked at the fields, the goats grazing 100 feet away, their bleats a quiet song. Peace wasn't a ceremony. It was this, a chair, a mug, a father who finally showed up. And in that stillness, I found what I'd fought for, not recognition, but home. The Montana sun rose over my farm, 15 miles outside Willow Creek, casting golden light across fields where I, Abigail Thompson, found peace after 17 years of silence. The porch where I'd sat with my father, Richard Thompson, days ago, held the echo of our quiet reconciliation, a second chair, a shared coffee, a truth finally seen. That moment wasn't about medals or applause. It was about standing firm through the pain of being erased, first by my family, then by the system I served. Yemen, 2008, taught me a lesson no Air Force mission ever could. Courage isn't just facing bullets, it's facing silence, judgment, and loss, and still choosing to stand. I didn't need the stage in Willow Creek's park, where 500 people heard Drive Noor Hassan's words, or General Samuel Brooks' salute, to know my worth. I needed to hold fast to the truth, that 50 children lived because I acted, even when it cost me everything. You don't need the world's approval to make a difference. That's the lesson. When life shuts you out, when your own blood, your Richard, your Michael, your Emily, turns away, hold your ground. Kien Din isn't just stubbornness, it's believing in what's right, even when it's lonely. Maybe you're facing a choice now, one where doing the right thing feels like a sacrifice. Do it anyway. Maybe you've been misunderstood, your name struck from someone's story. Keep going. The truth has a way of rising, like dust behind those Black Hawk SUVs, 200 feet long, that rolled into Willow Creek. It may take years, but it comes. And when it does, let it find you standing, not for recognition, but for yourself. Forgive those who hurt you, not because they deserve it, but because peace is your victory. I set that second chair on my porch, not knowing if Richard would come. I poured coffee, not expecting him to drink. That act was my strength, my way of saying I could love without needing love back. You can too. Plant your own field, 10 acres or 10 feet, and grow something true. Your courage, your truth, your life, it matters, even if no one claps. The Montana sky stretched wide over my farm, 15 miles outside Willow Creek, its colors fading from amber to dusk. I, Abigail Thompson, sat on my porch, the second chair still beside me, holding the memory of my father, Richard Thompson, and our unspoken peace. The truth of Yemen, 2008, had risen like dust in that park, carried by General Samuel Brooks' salute and Dr. Noor Hassan's words. My brother, Michael Thompson, and niece, Emily Thompson, had faced the weight of their misjudgments, their silence now a bridge to understanding. For 17 years, I'd stood firm, not for applause, but for the 50 children whose lives were my truth. This farm, these fields, this quiet, it was my victory, not a stage in Willow Creek where 500 voices finally heard me. But your voice matters too. Where are you watching from? A small town like mine, 200 miles from nowhere, or a city buzzing with life? Drop it in the comments. We read every one, and your story fuels ours. Have you ever been misunderstood, your truth buried under someone else's story? Share it below. Tag a friend who needs to hear about courage that doesn't shout, about standing tall when the world looks away. Hit that subscribe button if Abigail's fight stirred something in you. Join our community, where we celebrate second chances, quiet heroes, and truths that refuse to stay silent. Click the bell so you don't miss what's next. Because next time, we're diving into a story that'll shake you to your core. Picture this, a single mother, 30 miles from hope, changes her town with one bold move. No money, no power, just grit. You won't believe what she did, or what it sparked. It's coming, and it's big. The goats bleated softly, 100 feet away, as the stars blinked above my farm. I sipped my coffee, the same chipped mug I'd used for years. This wasn't the end of my story, it was the start of yours. Share this video. Let Abigail's courage ripple out, from Willow Creek to wherever you are. Let's build a world where truth doesn't wait 17 years to breathe. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.